Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our listeners wherever you are. My name is Debora. Today I will be hosting the 17th Agribusiness Academy podcast about blockchain for food. In a recent series of reports titled Shaping the Future of Food, the World Economic Forum frames the transformative 12 technologies that could deliver significant impact to our food systems by 2030. For food supply chains, these technologies are food sensing, the Internet of Things, or IoT, and blockchain. They have the potential to significantly reduce food waste and environmental impact, assuring food safety, as well as improving the livelihoods of smallholder farmers. Worldwide, there are many experiments that feed into this promise, but there are also challenges to overcome. Today, we will dive into the details of what makes or breaks the positive impact of blockchain technology for food. We do this with Alicia Noel, founder of Cultivati. She researches food supply chains and acts as an advisor to business and government. She also mentors food tech startups in worldwide accelerator programs like FoodX and DLab. She's an expert in food supply chains and blockchain traceability initiatives. Also with us today is my colleague Chaitra Bharath, Program Coordinator at Agribusiness Academy. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. Good to be here, Deborah.
Hello, Alicia, and thank you, Debora, for such a nice welcome to the program.
So, Alicia, please start by telling us a bit more about yourself and the journey that has led you to focus on food supply chain technologies.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you. So I'm originally from the US, and my grandparents were dairy farmers in Massachusetts. While I didn't grow up on the farm, I always had an awareness of the issues that they were facing. I had several careers here in corporate communications and government, financial management, and economic development. Then I moved to China at the beginning of 2008. When I was there, I quickly saw that there were a number of food safety concerns, mostly related to food fraud. So if you go back to 2008, that was the year of the big Sanlu baby formula scandal, where 6 children were reported dead and 300,000 children were made sick because melamine was put into the milk for the baby formula. After that, I saw food safety issue after food safety issue, and it was obviously a huge issue. In Beijing, I saw a number of food safety scandals. And speaking to my friends, people were afraid of the food that they were buying in the grocery store. They felt that they didn't know where they could get safe food. Because of my background in the US, not only as a farmer's granddaughter, but I had spent time working with farm stands at farmers markets in the city. I also had studied permaculture design, looking at the design of agricultural systems. And I'd spent a lot of effort and energy since the 1980s looking at organic agriculture and the ways that certification had changed and the ways that consumers perceive organic agriculture. So seeing organic ag in the grocery store in Beijing, when I asked people what they thought of it, I received one of several answers. Usually it was, I have no idea what that is, or it was, oh, it says it's organic, but it's not really. Somebody paid a bribe. And so these are entirely different problems. I ended up spending a lot of time researching what is organic in China, what does the certification mean, why is there this lack of trust with consumers, and there are systemic issues, as there are in many countries. Now, since then, the government has really stepped up enforcement as well as implemented a lot of new regulations. They're doing a lot more around food safety. But back in 2008, 2009, 2010, I was doing a lot of research. And then in 2012, I started being asked to speak on panels, to speak at conferences. Both families and also companies would send me messages. Where can we buy safe pork? Where can we buy safe dairy? And I started speaking with them about that. at the same time, we were all thinking about how do we improve the accountability in the system so that we can reduce this food fraud that was killing people and making a lot of people very sick. I came back to the United States at the end of 2014 thinking about improving accountability and improving traceability. And that's when I learned about this new technology called blockchain. When I learned that blockchain allows you to create a record that is immutable, that is, it's almost impossible to change it, I realized that this could provide that traceability that we'd been looking for. And then I started to see several different companies, including IBM, were working on using blockchain in food supply chains. So that's when a lot of light bulbs went off and I started really focusing on this type of traceability. And 2017, I interviewed a number of these companies, wrote a piece on this, and I also started learning about how blockchain is being used for issues in agriculture and food beyond just traceability. Because traceability was what brought me into it, but there's a lot of other issues in agriculture as well.
Now, many of our audience will have heard of the phrase blockchain, but often the strongest association is with Bitcoin, and people might not be so familiar with the technology behind it and what it might mean for the future of food. Could you explain in layman's terms what is the technology of blockchain and why it's considered so disruptive?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So a blockchain, you've got essentially two pieces. One, you have a distributed ledger. So imagine that you're keeping track of something on your computer, and imagine if you and I have a transaction, we're sharing that information. Either one of us could potentially change that record. But imagine if that information were shared across hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of different computers. That would make it harder to change. Plus, every time we have a new transaction, that information is cut up into a tiny piece of information called a hash and layered on top of the previous transactions, creating a chain. So you have blocks of information being formed into a chain, hence blockchain. And if I wanted to change a previous transaction, I'd need to change the information, not just on my computer and your computer and the computers of everyone else where it had been recorded. I would also need to change every single subsequent transaction, the record of every single subsequent transaction. So that's why we say it's immutable. That's why we say that you can't change that record. Now, obviously, garbage in, garbage out. So the information that we're putting into the blockchain needs to be reliable, needs to be trustworthy. And companies that are working with blockchain do put a lot of effort into deciding which data they're taking, which data they're recording, who they're getting it from, how it's being entered, to make sure that that data is valuable to them and gives them what they need.
So if I get it right, if someone does put garbage in, so to say, then we will be able to trace back to who has done that, right?
Exactly, because with every data point, you know where it came from. And this is also part of why a lot of companies are having not just people enter data, but there's a lot of Internet of Things, IoT. So sensors that have data are automatically uploading this data as well. Because sometimes that incorrect information going into the system, sometimes you might have a bad actor, sometimes it's just a user error, somebody has a typo. We've all had a typo. So if it's uploaded automatically from a sensor, that can reduce the errors there as well.
Now, you were saying that supply chain and traceability was what got you into it, but there's actually a lot more that blockchain can do for food and agriculture. So could you tell us in what ways this is?
Sure. So I'm finding that it's really exciting to me how much blockchain can offer support to all of the stakeholders along a food supply chain. I look at it as being 6 different ways that blockchain is contributing to food supply chains. Traceability being the first, and this is the biggest use, but we're also seeing commodities management. So whether that be wheat or corn or rice, managing the transfer and the information around the transfer of information and of the crops. One of the big companies in this area is Agridigital out of Australia, and they're doing a lot of wheat. And they're not just working in Australia, they're working in other parts of the world as well. And farmers working on these systems are uploading the information, and their buyers, sometimes the middlemen, sometimes the end companies, are having access to that. Plus, there's the smart contract aspect of it. And with a smart contract, when the farmer drops off their wheat or whatever crop that they're delivering, when the receiver takes delivery of that, payment for that can be automatically transferred. Historically, that's taken weeks, can take up to a month for the farmer to be paid for that. But with this, the payment can happen automatically. Or with the smart contract as well, that contract can be scheduled to take place automatically at a future time. So commodities management and managing the information there. Marketplace creation. There's a great company out of Israel that's doing a lot of work in Africa called Avenues GT, and they're creating an online marketplace, or they have an online marketplace. They've done work with coffee, they've done work with several other commodities being grown in Africa that's helping farmers and producers connect directly with the international importers, with the international buyers. So buyers can go on and look for the type of coffee, how much they're looking for, the conditions that it was grown under, which farmer it's coming from, buy directly. The farmers are having more information from their buyers and vice versa. It's allowing the farmers to increase their revenues while also allowing producers to have greater control and to have a more efficient system. Data sharing is a big one. There are another number of companies around the world that are collecting information on blockchain, especially using IoT sensors, to help them know what is the quality of this product, or when it was planted, when it was harvested. It could also have information about the soil health, the biome of the soil, the microbiome of the soil, as well as what the micronutrient level is of the plant. This is going to affect the flavors as well, if you're looking at it that way. So really exciting what can be done for that. And that also helps reduce food waste, which influences food security. So that's exciting. Access to capital. This is one of my favorites because smallholder farmers in developing countries often don't have a record of land ownership. They may not have a title if their family has had the land for generations, or if the local government does not have an effective way of recording this, or a trustworthy way of recording this. There's a great project out of Indonesia, great company in Indonesia called Haro Token, and they go in, they have their field agents that are going around to a number of smallholder farms, and they're walking the perimeter, uploading information about the farm with the GPS on their phones. This is allowing a record of where the farm is, what the farm's borders are, and they're providing an incentive to the farmers to participate by giving the farmers tokens that can be used in local shops to buy seeds, to buy fertilizers, other inputs. But the data they're collecting is being purchased by banks, it's being purchased by insurance companies, and the banks are now creating products for these farmers. The banks are now feeling confident to lend money to these farmers who otherwise have historically been unbanked or unable to access loans. Insurance companies can now insure farmers' crops that historically have not been insured. So that's a game changer for those farmers. Going on to the last of these 6 things I think about for blockchain and food and ag, one of the most simple is payments. So in Africa, BitPesa has been a game changer because it's allowing instant payments cross-border, instant or almost instant payments across borders. And yeah, and that's helping farmers as well as other producers and other sellers receive their money much faster.
This is really exciting, right? In how many different ways this technology can make a change. Chaitra, did you want to reflect on this?
Yeah, so Alicia, that's wonderful to know in such different ways blockchain could help us, make the existing system better and sometimes come up with such innovative solutions to the glaring problems in the world when it comes to food and ag tech. We have a worldwide audience of whom many are based in the upcoming economies like Africa and India. So, what examples do you know of blockchain technology being used in those regions?
Well, Avenues GT, which I had mentioned before, they've specifically been working with coffee growers in Rwanda. They've also been working with some farmers in South Africa. And that's for the marketplace creation. BitPesa, obviously, that they started in, I want to say Kenya, I might be wrong on that, and they work now in a number of different countries. So they've had to work with the banking systems in those countries so that they can receive money or deliver money directly into clients' bank accounts. And they've worked with the phone systems because a lot of people are working on their phones, sometimes smartphones, but sometimes the older phones that don't have that internet capability. So everything is attached to a phone number. So money is being transferred to somebody's account that is entirely based on their phone systems. In India right now, there's a project that I'm working with relatively near Mumbai, where the people are working with grape farmers that in a way that once the system is up, it is going to allow better traceability of these grapes, many of which are being sold into the European Union market, which is going to give the European buyers greater confidence. It's also going to enable the Indian producers to improve their revenue. It's also, the platform is also going to allow the farmers to do farmer to farmer trades, so that if a farmer who's growing grapes wants to buy another product to feed their families or for their community, they don't have to go to the general market. They can interact directly with the producers of these other products, so that they're not paying that retail markup. That's really exciting as well, because sometimes if farmers are working in a monocropping system, if you have to buy something else, you're paying a markup, even if you're generating low prices for the product that you're growing. So excited about that. Yeah.
That's great. So currently we are running a champions program in Africa with professionals working on commodity product lines like coffee, cassava, and rice as well. And we have some people in animal protein sources like poultry and pork. So how applicable do you think blockchain technology is to these specific value chains?
Oh, very, very applicable. Now, for poultry and also for pork, most of the initiatives that I know are in Asia, because that's where I've spent most of my time looking, but I've seen some very exciting things in that area. There are several poultry initiatives that I know of that when they cull the chickens at about 4 to 6 weeks of age, when they're old enough, they choose which chickens they're going to continue raising and which chickens not. They put sensors on the chickens, which allow them to track the chicken's movement. And they're also allowing consumers who are buying the chicken over the app to watch the chickens and to choose their chicken, or to watch a chicken that they might buy over video. They can see where the chicken is right now. You've got the sensor that's helping you keep an eye on it, identify which one is yours. They're even created artificial intelligence that is basically a facial recognition for chickens, which I find is hilarious. One other initiative in China, from JD.com, Jingdong. They're working with these smallholder chicken farmers on a chicken traceability project that has the ankle sensors for the chickens, but they're also providing no interest loans to the farmers so that the farmers can scale up, they can grow and make capital upgrades that aren't going to cost them. So they're able to improve their operations as well. So I think there's some really exciting stuff going on in poultry. Pork is a huge issue in China. There's been a lot of concern over that historically. There have been concerns about clenbuterol in the meat. There's been concerns about fraud where sellers have said that a meat was pork and it was actually something else. There's a project out of Ireland called ArcNet, and ArcNet has been working on a system called EU-China Food Safe, where they're taking the DNA of pigs when they're born and uploading that information about the pigs onto a blockchain so it can't be changed. When those pigs are imported into another country, a sample can be taken, a test can be done to look at the DNA of the animal, and it can be compared back to make sure that the meat being received is a match for the meat that the importer or the buyer thought that they were buying. This has tremendous implications for food fraud.
It's exciting to hear all these opportunities and possibilities. It's almost
Yes.
that you think, can it be true? So, what do you think are the biggest challenges for widespread adaptation of blockchain in food and agriculture? If these challenges are there, I mean, would there be a difference in approach for upcoming economies like Africa, or are really worldwide the same challenges?
I think some of it really depends on the system. Some of the biggest challenges are what information are we putting on the blockchain? What information is being stored off blockchain? If you are using a public blockchain, because there are many different blockchains, some are available, are public, which means anyone can store data, anyone can do a transaction. If you are doing that, then you have to pay a transaction fee for every time you do a transaction. And the more information you put on there, the more you're going to have to pay. So some companies are storing most of their information off chain and only a marker on chain that allows people to know where to go to look for the data. Some companies are creating their own private versions of blockchains where they control all of the computers, and this allows them to do it lower cost. There's also concern with that of, well, if they control all of the computers, then how do we know no one is going in and changing the information? When it comes to some of the bigger challenges, it's a matter of how do we roll this out? Is there good internet in these places? Does the hardware exist for what we're trying to accomplish? There have been great projects in fisheries and seafood where sensors are being slapped on fish, being put on fish right when they're caught. And those sensors are syncing with GPS devices on a boat, and that's being recorded that way. But in order for that to happen, you need to have access to those GPS devices. You need to have access to those types of sensors. With any type of sensor, what are the price points? Some of these are expensive. Some of these sensors are really expensive. And if you can use them over and over, if you can use them multiple times, that's not such a problem. But if you can only use a sensor once, this is going to have a difficult effect on the final price point. Obviously, a lot of consumers are going to be willing to pay a little bit more for greater confidence, but how much more are consumers willing to pay? There's a company out of Slovenia called Origin Trail, and for fast-moving consumer goods, your CPG, consumer packaged goods like potato chips or soda, candies, if things are tracked at the batch level, they can track that. They've got it down to fractions of a penny per item. But if you're tracking something where it needs to be tracked on an individual level, say investment grade wines, you're going to be using different hardware and different technology that's going to really increase the cost $2 to at least several dollars per item. So these are some of the things we need to think about when we're designing systems. There's a lot of different moving pieces. So anyone who's designing a system, I would say start by thinking about what you need to record. What is it that you're trying to get out of the system? I hear a lot of companies say they want to use blockchain. And when I ask why, it's, well, because we want to use blockchain. Blockchain is a tool. What's the problem you're trying to solve? Because you want to make sure that it's the right tool. Not every problem needs blockchain. Not every blockchain solution fits every problem. So it's really important for a company or an organization to think about the issues they're trying to address before they design their system.
Now, your example about the fish sensors is actually a nice bridge to my next question about inclusiveness of new technologies to smallholders. The World Economic Forum points out that inclusiveness is really important as a challenge that needs addressing. Could you share with us your thoughts on this?
There's a great company out of the Netherlands called Fair Food, and they've done some really exciting projects around the world. There's a specific project they did in Indonesia, which has a large number of smallholder farmers, and that project was focused on coconuts. In that Indonesian coconut project, a lot of information was recorded. When a consumer in Europe goes to buy a coconut, if they scan the QR code, they get information not just on who the farmer was who harvested the coconut. They also get information, what was the usual payment price per coconut? Plus Fair Food puts in place a Fair Food premium, so the farmer and the farm workers are being paid a living wage. So you've got the regular price, the Fair Food premium, what's the total price? And then if you look at the total of number of coconuts, you then see what's the total amount that the farmer should have received. Because this technology is interactive, we can then see a receipt from the farmer certifying that yes, they did receive that entire price. They received that premium so that they're getting a fair wage, so that they're making a fair amount of money for their labor. And that's really exciting to me, because if only the consumers are benefiting by this, then we're leaving out very important people in the supply chain. Without respect for the farmers, without equity for the farmers, we're not having the full effect. So we're seeing more and more projects that are including social and economic equity for everyone in the supply chain. That's really exciting to me.
Yeah, it definitely is. I've heard from Fair Food as well, and they're doing great things. Now, just to come back shortly to the fish sensors example, because that keeps sitting in my mind. That, like, if, for example, a big retailer, and I was to say, you know, what I'm going to do, I'm going to make sure I track all my tuna or whatever it is, so I can show the consumer where it comes from. When I'm doing that project, in the end, it turns out that only the big fishing fleets can pay these sensors, and that in the end, the smallholder fisheries, they're out of business because they can't pay the sensors. I mean, what would be a solution for that? Would the retailer or the party in between have to say, we're going to give these sensors also to the small fisheries, or should there be banks involved to?
Well, but no, that's a really important issue. That's something that's important to address. Any system that's being created needs to include more than just one actor. So it's not just the fisherman or just the grocery chain. It needs to involve many different actors in the supply chain. And for the very smallholder farmers, usually we're not expecting them to buy their own sensors or buy their own their own handset. In fact, for a lot of initiatives, the technology company is providing handsets that are preloaded with the necessary software. That reduces problems around if the software that's being developed is compatible with the farmer's existing software. If something is being built for an Android phone, but the farmer doesn't have an Android, if they have something local or we call them dumb phones, if they have a dumb phone, they're not going to be able to do that. Well, a technology company that's implementing across hundreds or thousands of farms, they can buy inexpensive Android handsets at a much lower price point, preload the software to make sure that it's working properly, and distribute those. This is helping keep the costs down and lowering the needs of the farmers to invest in that type of technology.
Now, we were talking before about data sharing. You were saying actually in your previous answer that we need all the chain partners to be involved for it to work. Now, there comes the challenge of data sharing between different parties in the value chain, where trust is a big issue. Taking this into consideration, what do you think would be the convincing argument for the different partners to start sharing their data on the blockchain?
Well, certainly some of the information they might feel comfortable sharing, some not. Depending on how a program is designed, even if information's on the chain, it can be cryptographically secure, and then only designated actors can have access to that information. Going back to that fish example, there was a project with the World Wildlife Foundation and fisheries in Fiji where that GPS device on the boat was recording where the fish was caught, but that information is not available to the general public. The public knows it was caught in Fiji. Oh, and because it was Fiji, we know that it was sustainably caught because Fiji has very strict regulations around that, and Fiji enforces those regulations. But only certain actors have access to exactly where the boat caught the fish, because no fishing boat wants to share with the general public where they're going, because there's competition. Every fisherman knows where they take their boats, where they can get the best fish, where they like to go to get the best schools of fish. So that's an example of information being recorded. And that way, if there is a problem, one example, if there's an infection or an illness, something has been, the quality of the project has been compromised, it is there, but only the designated actors can go in and access it.
When using blockchain for food traceability and data sharing, you already mentioned the quality of the data that put onto the blockchain is a challenge. And I heard you mention, we can overcome this by maybe IoT or DNA or anything. Would that be the answer, or would there be more ways to ensure that that's put on the blockchain is actually?
I think sensors are really useful. DNA, well, I think that's a really exciting use of DNA and the possibility of recording data and checking that the product you're receiving is truly the product you bought. That is a bit more difficult to do because you need the technology on both sides, and this is going to add to the cost. Sensors, when you're buying a lot of sensors, the price point on sensors keeps coming down. 3M has a lot of different sensors that are recording information that are NFC, near field communication, or other types of sensors, some of which are being used. I see smaller companies as well that are developing these technology. Because one of the problems, though, is, are these sensors able to go in the field? Are they able to withstand rain and other conditions in the field? In fact, one dairy company that I'm friends with, when speaking with their founders a couple of years ago, they've got infrared sensors that they're using for early detection of mastitis in dairy animals. And one problem they had early on is finding monitors that could withstand being close to the cow, because sometimes they're close to the cow and the cow urinates or defecates, and that can get all over your camera and your sensor. I know that my iPad would not withstand that. My iPad would not be happy about being in a stream of cow urine or cow manure. So you need technology, you need sensors that are going to be able to withstand the conditions in the field. And the prices of that can add up.
Now, in the beginning, you've talked about what blockchain is and how it's immutable. Now, Alicia, many of the current blockchain traceability initiatives are working with so-called private blockchains. And in one of our earlier conversations, you mentioned that this leaves out the true strength of blockchain technology as an open and trustless system. Could you elaborate on the risk you see in this development?
Okay, going back to the blockchain having information that's shared on many, many computers, if we were just sharing it, your computer and my computer, and I changed the record on my computer, I could also change the record on when the information was last edited, it would be your word against mine. One of the benefits of a public blockchain is that the information is stored on many computers, often thousands or tens of thousands of computers, or nodes. We use the word nodes in this context. In a private blockchain, the nodes are controlled by a much smaller number of actors, of players, sometimes one, sometimes a handful. So do you trust all of the different actors in that player not to modify their record? If you trust everyone in your supply chain, if you're not worried about fraud, then that might not be a concern of yours.
Often blockchain is trying to actually show or prevent fraud. So
exactly. Some of the consortiums, even though it's a limited number of people, you then have different companies that are controlling the nodes, that are controlling the computers where the information is being stored. And not all of those companies that are storing the information do work together. So that helps reduce the likelihood of any of them playing. And this is why it's really important for companies to think about what's most important to them and what they really need. One of the high-profile earlier initiatives in this was a World Food Program initiative at a refugee camp in Lebanon that was helping the refugees from Syria in the Lebanese refugee camp access their credit at the local canteen, at the local store when they're buying food. And World Food Program says they used a private version of the Ethereum blockchain. They weren't concerned about the type of fraud of data being changed in the system. They were doing that because they were doing this project with blockchain to get the experience of blockchain. So that as they design other systems, as they design other projects, they already have the learning from this first system. And it's great that they realize that it does take time. There are a lot of lessons learned along the way. So it made sense for them to do something on a private chain. It made sense for them to recognize that they were giving up something by doing it this way, but the learning was still worthwhile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as a startup mentor and business advisor, you speak to many food and agri entrepreneurs that are looking to use a blockchain technology in their business case. Could you share with our listeners kind of like the do's and don'ts on journey from an entrepreneurial point of view?
One of the first things is, do you know what you need? What are you really trying to create? And what do your customers care about? Because some people want to use blockchain, some companies want to use blockchain for the sake of using blockchain in a press release. Oh, we use blockchain, it's going to get us press. It's going to get us more investors. We're actually past the point now of most investors, of sophisticated investors, investing in a project because there's blockchain. Now we can ask more questions. What problem is being solved, and how is the project being structured? So that's really important. If if you've only got the hammer and you're looking at the problem like it's a nail, that problem might not be a nail. Sometimes you need a different tool. And if you're only looking at one blockchain system, that might not be the right type of system to use for your challenges and to address the things that your customers care about. So getting really clear on what your challenges are and what your problems are is the first step to doing anything, whether blockchain or not. Also, think about who you're partnering with. Do they have the experience? Do they have the knowledge? Are they being respectful of your needs? If a potential partner comes in and doesn't understand what your challenges are, but tells you that they have the answer, how can they have the answer if they don't really understand the issues? So that's really important as well.
Good. Yeah. Well, thank you, Alicia. You've given us many food for thought, I think, and some really nice examples to dive into a bit more deep. For those who are interested, maybe you could email us later on the links for the companies, and then we can put it below the podcast.
I'd be happy to.
And well, my closing question would be, where can our audience find out more about you and your work, Alicia?
Sure, thank you. Well, you can go to my website, cultivati.com, so cultivati.com, or I post a lot on Twitter, so you can go to @cultivati on Twitter as well to find more stories from across the world of food supply chain blockchain and food supply chain traceability in general.
Okay, thank you, Alicia, for your enthusiasm and the insight you gave us into the promise and challenges you see for blockchain and food and agriculture. And thank you, Chaitra, for pitching in with some extra questions on behalf of the participants of our current African Champions program. And of course, many thanks to our audience for listening to the 17th Agribusiness Academy podcast. We're looking forward to welcome you on the next event. And for now, enjoy your day and goodbye.